What are the things that you normally check in order to avoid IP issues or a patent and stuff like that?
So I always tell private label sellers do this before you buy any product.
Three most common type of suspensions. Which one will it be according to your experience?
So when you see that happening, the best thing to do usually is do a test buy if possible.
What will be your advice to sellers to avoid account suspension and listing suppression or account related issues?
Ecom Squeezed podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Ecom Squeezed. I am your host Sebastian, founder of Retail-Outsource, and today I'm really pumped up to introduce David. He's a lawyer, a strategist, and most likely a person who just goes through Amazon's terms and conditions and policies and stuff like that for fun, basically, right? That's something most of the people ignore. So joining us today is David Miller. He is the founder of law office of David Allen Miller. David helps Amazon sellers around the world when their account gets suspended or listing get taken down or any IP claims and stuff like that. David is gonna give you more details as we go, but welcome to the show, David.
Thank you for having me, Sebastian. It's a pleasure.
Great. So could you just tell how you got started helping Amazon sellers?
Sure. So out of law school, I got my first big boy job at a law firm. First didn't really know what I wanted to do. I explored a few different areas while I was in law school. After law school, after I graduated, ended up at a small boutique IP law firm. And that was partially how my Amazon knowledge started, where first I was, handling a lot of IP related matters. And as Amazon was growing, it was even already big at the time. It's even bigger now, of course. This is, about a decade ago or so. Lots of people were calling in related to issues related to Amazon. So it kind of started with IP issues. It then spilled into a lot of Amazon issues. And I realized that there aren't many lawyers that really know Amazon. So there's lots of IP lawyers, there's business lawyers, right? But not a ton out there at the time. Very few, almost none actually, that really had a specific focus on Amazon itself. So I became, one of the go-to people about Amazon related issues. My knowledge grew from there, eventually went off on my own and really just, focused even more so on Amazon in addition to legal issues, traditional legal issues and non-traditional ones, because a lot of times we'll get other attorneys that will either refer cases to us or even ask our advice on specific Amazon issues because it's not very traditional. So that's kind of how it grew, and it continues to grow from there.
And how you reached over here. So I want to ask you, this is kind of a common issue with most sellers. Let's say, I have some listing and I just found out that competitors have hijacked my listing and they have changed the title and they have, tried to manipulate the reviews. So how do you, this happens with a lot of Chinese sellers doing that, right? So how do you deal with this kind of scenario? What are the first steps that you take it as a seller?
Sure. So this is a classic hijacking situation, usually also spills into trademark infringement, even counterfeiting as well sometimes. It can be a tricky situation for sellers, super stressful, especially once not only are they on the listings, which is bad enough sometimes for private label brands, but when other infringing sellers are also on the listings, changing the details, changing the images, a lot of times even changing the brand name, it starts with getting in contact with the seller who manipulated the detail page, right? By sending a cease and desist letter, informing them that what they're doing isn't legal, that it's a violation of numerous laws in addition to Amazon policy, and that they need to fix it as soon as possible. Now, usually what sellers will say to us is, what happens if they don't answer, they don't comply, especially when, the other side is overseas, in China. They don't have many US assets, for example, right? Assuming we're on the Amazon.com platform, they're not super incentivized to really comply, right? It's not like if you're, based here, you have assets here, that kind of thing. So if they don't comply, that's when we have to take it up with Amazon directly. Sometimes we have to escalate the case and even get in contact with the Amazon legal department, or sometimes even Amazon's outside counsel if the lower level appeal teams don't either know what's happening or comply with the requests. And Actually, these kinds of things happen a lot more than people realize.
Oh, that's very true. Yeah, you mentioned about cease and desist letter, right? So let's assume, I'm on the other side. I got a letter, cease and desist, right? Just for using product image. Means I think that's the angle normally a lot of people take, right? Using the images. So how do you respond? How do you deal with this kind of scenarios without making the situation, without escalating the issue?
So if we're on the private label side, right, so the one who's the victim in this scenario, it's not always super easy to de-escalate. The way of de-escalating it is to send out a letter and try, you don't want to make it more threatening than it needs to be, essentially where it's like, these are, you're not supposed to be doing this. You don't have to necessarily threaten a lawsuit. Sometimes that is effective and sometimes it's necessary depending on the damage. But to de-escalate, it's more of, warning, a notice where it's not, hey, we're going to sue you if you don't fix this in 24 hours. It's more, we noticed that this happened. Please update this as soon as possible. We don't want to have to escalate this and we hope we don't have to. So it's more of a friendly letter, if you will.
Great. David, let's assume that I'm launching a product, right? I have everything ready, packaging, the brand name, everything is ready. So in that scenario, as a lawyer who are experienced on the compliance and the trademark and everything, how do you look into that launch? What are the things that you normally check in order to avoid IP issues or a patent and stuff like that?
Sure. So it could be quite a few things, right? So let's start with the IP side, right? So assuming you're ready to launch, okay, usually a brand name has to be determined, right? Assuming it's a private label.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes sellers will already come to us and they already have a name picked out, but they haven't actually filed the trademark application. Okay. Depending on where you're based, you can need one in a few different countries possibly, right? Of course, the US is usually a big one, the UK as well, EU. But if you're selling on Amazon.com, it's important that you have US IP rights as well. So the UK won't protect you here in the US, right? So that's the first thing. So if they have a brand name, first we have to look into make sure that there's not another brand in the same class of goods that already exists, right? And it's much better to do this before you go buy a bunch of inventory and brand the products, because then you have a pretty serious problem if someone accuses you of infringement, and this happens all the time. So I always tell private label sellers do this before you buy any product. This is something that should be done very early on, and the application process is pretty slow, okay? So that's the first step. Once we determine a brand name, then you want to file a trademark application with the USPTO. That's the United States Patent and Trademark Office. That gives you access to brand registry. And if you have access to brand registry, it's a lot easier to enforce your trademark rights. And what's great about it is you don't actually have to wait for the trademark to actually register. So the day you file the application, you get a serial number, and you use that serial number to enroll in Amazon's brand registry program. The USPTO takes their time to respond. The good news for you is you have all the benefits of brand registry almost immediately. Maybe it could take a couple of days just to go back and forth with Amazon, but for the most part, sellers don't have a very tough time with it. So I'd say that's super important. Then, depending on the products that you're offering, you may also want to look out for potential patent infringement. If you're selling t-shirts, for example, you don't really have to worry so much about patents, right? You always should be on the lookout. If your product is, let's say, fairly unique, you also should do a patent search to make sure that there's no infringement. It could be a little bit trickier than doing a trademark search, right? Trademark search, you're really just looking for names, maybe logos, and then you can file something pretty easily. For patents, the search is a little bit more complicated, right? So a lot of times an attorney is helpful, but again, it's more for certain types of products that are unique. Examples like t-shirts and things like that, you don't really have to worry as much about it. And then in addition to that, once you're launching on Amazon and creating listings, you just want to be really careful about how those listings are created, right? Making sure your brand name is accurate, it matches, what you filed for. In addition to just make sure you're in compliance with Amazon policy. So no product detail, page tampering, and don't reference other trademarks as well. So kind of a mouthful, a lot to go over, but those are some of the most common ones.
Great. Yeah, you put in some great points. So let's say that the same product launch, right? down the line on the roadmap, like let's say after 18 months, there is an international expansion planned as well for that product. So you mentioned about US launch, US trademark, patent and everything. So what about the rest of the world, for example, UK and EU? So will you recommend the client to do the search at the same time, to make sure that it doesn't have the same trademark registered in those countries? And if it's registered, how do you approach that situation?
So it's always good to do it, right? The reality of it is a lot of business owners aren't going to care too much about it, especially before they even, before they're cash flowing, right? So if let's say it's a US business based here in the US, they don't even know necessarily if they're going to launch in the EU ever, possibly, right? Depending on how big the seller is, if they're brand new. So a lot of times, even if we recommend that, they won't really want to spend the time and money about, doing searches in the EU, for example. So it's always a good idea because you never know. I've seen brands grow very quickly and this becomes a real thing. So it's always a good idea. But the most important is to start where you're located, where you're going to be launching, because you never know what's going to happen afterwards. So I still think it's a good idea, but in the real world, it doesn't happen as much.
Great. And let's say, one of my best-selling ASIN got removed. This happens a lot of time, right? Due to like safety concerns, and Amazon normally doesn't mention, what are those specifics, right? In that case, again, how do you respond to those kind of cases?
Yeah, so this is, again, something that really needs to be looked in very closely early on. And a lot of times it's not. And we don't get the call until after now the listing is deactivated, right? I wish they would ask these questions, whether it's us or someone else that knows Amazon compliance beforehand. Really product dependent, but what you really have to hone in on when it comes to Amazon is there's lots of different categories. So you have to know your category fairly well. And then you have to put yourself even through a process of, okay, for this particular category, we need these documents. We need this, from the FDA. We need certificates. There are certain safety standards, right? If you're selling, let's say, baby products, for example, toys usually are the most scrutinized. So that's really what you want to be on the lookout for. There are certain things out of the seller's control, but things like that are very much in your control. So if you attack it beforehand, you're way less likely to have a problem.
True. I agree with you, David. And, this is something I see a lot. Account gets suspended due to like related accounts, and Amazon doesn't say which related account is that. What's the plan in that scenario? I assume that you have dealt with a lot of issues like that.
We have. So related account issues have changed a little bit over time. So I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago, sellers used to need to get permission for a second account. Okay, if you didn't get permission, Amazon wouldn't allow it. And if they caught it, they would suspend both accounts. Several years ago, Amazon said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You can have a second account now if it's for what they call a legitimate business reason. So then everyone's like, okay, well, what does that mean? What's considered a legitimate business reason? Amazon basically said, they give a couple of examples, but they didn't give every example. One of them is, okay, if you have a separate private label business, so you own 2 brands, they actually want you to have 2 separate accounts. They're okay with that. Okay. If you have 2 businesses and you sell goods in separate classes, they're also okay with it. So think t-shirts in store 1, electronics in store 2. Again, Amazon's okay with it. So first off, what we generally recommend is get confirmation in writing from Amazon, just in case what you just mentioned ever happens. Sometimes Amazon will say A and then they'll act on B. So what we usually say is, okay, get in contact with seller support when you're creating your second account. Get them to confirm that it's okay, even though it's not required, because if it's ever a rainy day and Amazon flags the account for being related, then you have cold hard proof that Amazon said they were okay with it. It's just helpful in terms of related accounts. Now let's assume none of this happened, right? One day Amazon says your account is related, and like you mentioned, they don't really give you a ton of information behind it. What used to happen is they wouldn't give you any information behind which store it was connected to. Then they started giving you the first 3 letters of the store that you were being flagged for being related to. It sounds like you remember this because you're shaking your head.
Yes.
Recently, in the last couple of years, they started actually giving the full store name for the most part. Sometimes I still see where it's not the whole store name, but they do actually seem to reveal that information. And really what you have to do depends somewhat on the factual circumstances. So in the case where you have no idea what you've never heard of this store, for example, you don't know anyone else maybe that even sells on Amazon, you're left scratching your head. You really have to go into investigation mode there. Right? So if you don't have any family, friends, anyone that you could think of that also sells on Amazon, what we generally tell sellers is look at your third parties that you're working with, third party service providers, right? Virtual assistants, account managers, anyone that can log into your account. Because what we've seen happen is a third party service provider, if they log into your account and you're a client of theirs, there's a good chance you're not the only client, right? So if they log into others, we've seen that cause problems, which leads me to my next point. Add them as users. I wouldn't give your username and password. I think that's problematic. So it has nothing to do with you, but you have a VA that signed into someone else's account. They get flagged for being suspended. So their account suspended. Once that VA logs into another account, it's happened before where then Amazon believes that the accounts are related, even though they're really not. And then you have to go through a whole process to prove that you weren't actually related. And it's not a lot of fun. So that's how you do it. If you do know who you are related to, so say it is a friend, it is a family member, then it's really just a documentation game, right? Show that the businesses were separate credit cards, owned by separate people. Usually that does the trick.
Great. And you mentioned about the admin assets and the user assets, right? So admin is the business owner and the users will be the VA, the accounts and accountant and everything, right? So that's how it needs to be structured, right? You should never give the admin password to anyone of those, right?
Correct. From what we've seen, it's a lot less risky when you're added as a user, when you add them as a user rather than giving them account login information. It's also safer for you as the seller.
Yeah, great. And I want to ask you about the POA, right? So I assume that you have written thousands of POAs, right, in the past.
We have.
So what's kind of an average price? Is that the first time? Do you have any percentage saying, okay, we got it account back, like 40% at the first try or second try? Do you have any figures like that?
No, so we're a law firm, so we're actually not allowed to give success rates.
Yeah.
They're also, to be frank, they're also misleading. So, for example, people will ask, well, it's an inauthentic, what are the odds of being reinstated? There's such a wide scale on the likelihood of success, right? So there's inauthentic case number one, where the seller has invoices directly from the brand. Okay. Very high success rates with that.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have inauthentic cases where the account's suspended and they don't have any invoices. They don't have any receipts. They bought it off of Telegram or they bought it from a flea market with no documentation. Success rate is very low. So inauthentics, that's just one example where you have really high success rates for the first case I mentioned and then really low for the second. So I think there's information out there where people just give misleading figures and it's not usually that cut and dry. It comes down to how strong factually is the case, how strong are their documents. So even specific types of account suspensions, it's not really a one size fits all. And I know that's kind of an annoying answer when people ask, but that's really the truth. So that's what I tell sellers when we shoot our own content, when people call in and ask, because that's the truth.
True. And I assume, for each POA that you write, you do the full case study on that, what happened and everything, and then prepare that POA, right? And we have now AI as well.
Yep.
So, I have seen some videos on YouTube and stuff like that using AI. But I'm not convinced about that because, the amount of research that you have to do, I don't think AI can cope with it. So what's your comment on that?
So we know that Amazon doesn't love people using AI tools to draft appeals, but obviously it's going to be used because ChatGPT or Perplexity can draft a response in a matter of seconds. So I certainly understand why people use it. And I don't think it's a bad place to start. And I think what happens is a lot of sellers will try it on their own. Sometimes they'll write it on their own. Now, they'll try and use AI to write a draft. But don't just copy and paste what ChatGPT gives you. Make sure it actually, one, it makes sense. Two, the facts are right. and three, that it accurately represents Amazon policy, because sometimes it doesn't. So I think it's a good place to start, but don't just, copy and paste it, and make sure it reads well and it's accurate. Okay. I have seen notices where Amazon will even say that, we've seen that, this looks like it came from AI, but I'm sure it's worked before, so I'm not fully buying that. It's kind of funny when Amazon says that, because what are they using to respond? There's not a human reading every single appeal these days. I don't think it's happened for a while. So
True.
yeah, I'd say to sum it up, yeah, I think it's a good place to start, but read it, edit it accordingly, and usually, well, like I said, people will reach out to us if those efforts fail.
If you're a sales on stake, I think it's better to give it a try with the expert. Always hand it over the expert who can deal with it. And in your case, most of the people will think that you as a person, as a lawyer, people will come only when there is like a suspension of the account or listing compliance issue or taken down on a situation like that. Will you recommend them, like for a business which is growing, to have an monthly audit or weekly audit depending on the size? Do you recommend anything like that?
I think it's a good idea. It always depends on a number of factors. It's never going to hurt, right? Too often, and I understand why, right? I mean, people aren't just reaching out to attorneys unless they really feel like they need one, which, is totally understandable. On the Amazon side of things, I wish sellers prepared for these kinds of things more, because you don't want it to be this huge fire where it's like, okay, now the account is suspended and now there's no revenue coming in. And if this lasts for, weeks or months, then you're gonna have to start terminating employees. It can be an absolute disaster. So I think it's a good idea beforehand, or at least ask questions about potential risk. I think that's really the biggest issue, is that sellers don't realize how risky certain things are. They just assume it's not a big deal, which, again, I understand why they think that, but anyone who's experienced on Amazon knows that they're not always rational. So very, very, let's call them small crimes, can equal life in prison. So that's what I'll say about that.
Great. There are a lot of different types of suspensions, right, within Amazon. So if you want to rate the most, like, let's say, three most common type of suspensions, which one will it be according to your experience?
Sure. So first, I would say it's authenticity related. So Amazon will flag sellers for concerns of authenticity or inauthentic. Sometimes the language is a bit different. We've seen maybe inauthentic, but the bottom line is authenticity is number one. Number two, I'd say IP infringement. Okay, so a lot of times if you get multiple IP complaints, Amazon doesn't have a system where it's, okay, once you get 5 IP complaints, your account is suspended. We've seen one IP complaint cause suspensions. I've seen where there's 20 on an account and they're still active. So Amazon doesn't always have a rhyme or reason behind when they suspend, but IP complaints is probably the second. The third one, I think, depends on the time of year. It changes also just, year to year. Certain suspensions are more common than others. But I'd say recently, probably related accounts are pretty common as of now in the last couple of months. So we talked about that a little bit. So inauthentics, IP, and related accounts, I'd say, are the top three in July of 2025.
Great. Border.
Yeah, so it will cause an issue. Separate laptops is important. A lot of sellers also use VPNs because they're scared about this kind of thing. Being in the same office, in the same house, for example, I've even seen where it's a couple of people that just happen to be Amazon sellers that aren't affiliated with each other, but share a WeWork space that they connected the dots, and that caused the problem. So obviously ridiculous, but if you're, separating, your laptop, you don't really let anyone log into it, you're careful, you should be fine. Are there things that happen? Yes. But I would say just maybe avoid logging in just public spaces. Again, I think it's a small risk, but I've seen a lot of them happen over time. In the grand scheme of things, is the percentage high in all of the suspensions around the world over the last 10 years? I'm sure it doesn't happen very much. Keep in mind, we get the phone, the phone rings when these kinds of things happen. So our view on it might be a little bit skewed, and I'm aware of that because we only see when it goes bad. But if you're talking and you really want to cross your T's and dot your I's, I just wouldn't let anyone log in on my computer. I try and avoid public spaces when I'm logging in. Keep it to your office or to your home.
From the topic a little bit, because this just came to my mind. Let's assume that I have like 1,000 reviews on my product, and a reseller came, means it's been supplied properly, but he was selling fake. Introducing fake products, and that just tanked the reviews of the listing, let's say from 4.5 till 4. So how do you explain that to Amazon, saying, okay, this guy was selling fake, not authentic products, and you have just purchased it, and you have seen it, you have the pictures, you have the proof, and how do you convey that message to Amazon in that scenario?
So I don't usually like to answer a question with a question, but here I just want to make sure I have the facts right, so I give the audience a good answer. In this case, it's someone else that joined the listing of the brand and then sold product, and then the reviews were negative because of that seller, right?
Yeah.
Okay, understood. So in that scenario, the truth is you're going to have a very hard time getting those reviews removed, okay? Review removals, Amazon, a lot of times they're just not going to do it. So the best way to avoid this is to attack it before it gets bad. So a couple of reviews you can deal with, but if you let it linger and don't do anything about it, especially if it's a decent sized seller, they can rack up a lot of reviews quickly, and that's where brand protection comes in. You have to be the one to protect your brand. No one is coming to save you. So when you see that happening, the best thing to do usually is do a test buy if possible, and then get in contact with them to get the activity to stop. If you have to, you might have to report them to Amazon through an IP infringement report. Okay. But if you're just banking on Amazon removing reviews, a lot of times you're going to have a very, very difficult time. That's just the truth. I mean, you could bang your head against a wall. Can it happen? Yes, but you're going to have to go through a lot of effort. A lot of sellers are not going to have that amount of time to even do it. And even if you spend a lot of time and even money doing it, sometimes Amazon still will say, we're not removing the reviews, because they view those products as part of the listing. Everyone who's on that listing is supposed to be selling the exact same product per Amazon policy. So they're very hesitant to remove reviews. So I wouldn't expect it. I would say, again, attack it first so that this doesn't get bad and it's more manageable.
Yeah. And the next question is kind of a tricky one. I have seen it for myself happening. Normally, like Chinese sellers, what they do, they register a lot of design patents, like a square card and stuff, quite similar one. There's nothing special. For example, in the UK, they get approved straight away. And they use that as a weapon to take down the competitor listing. And there was some similar case, and one seller went against that Chinese seller and have reversed, and they revoked the trademark and the design patent as well. So have you seen scenarios like that in the US as well?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, all the time. All the time it happens. There's a number of different things that can be done about it. First off, again, is getting in contact with them, demand a retraction. A lot of times they're not going to do it. So then it's up to you to form your argument to Amazon to be able to get an appeal approved through Amazon directly. Okay, there's a number of ways you can do that. One is that the product isn't even valid for a patent, that it never should have been patented to begin with, and explain why. Another is substantial similarities, where maybe the product isn't substantially similar to begin with. And the third, these are just the most common, or that would be you started selling the product before the patent was even filed. It doesn't even have to be you specifically. It could be actually anyone out in the world. So let's say they filed for a patent on July 24th, 2025, right? If anyone out in the world was selling these products, let's say in 2023, 2022, even if it wasn't you, that's grounds for the patent to be invalidated. So those are the three most common ways of counter-arguing against a design patent claim.
And I assume you have done a lot of patent invalidation, right, in your career?
Not a ton of invalidations. The process is a little bit different. It doesn't always make sense to a lot of sellers, so we don't really handle lots of those. But if usually we'll refer those out when if it makes sense. But again, a lot of times these other things make more sense beforehand because invalidation can take a lot of time. It's also pretty expensive. So if you're able to resolve it a lot quicker and cheaper, it's usually what we'll try to do first.
My last question will be, what will be your advice to sellers to avoid account suspension and listing suppression or any issues, account-related issues? What will be your suggestion in general?
Yeah, it's a question I get every day, and there's a lot of things, so I could probably talk about this one question. I could probably talk for hours about all of the things that can be done. So I'm not going to do that because I don't want to bore the audience to tears, but I'll give you a couple, right? So
Sure.
First off, making sure your suppliers are really strong and that your invoices are strong. Don't buy from, someone that you can't verify. Okay. So if you can't connect your supplier with an authorized distributor or a brand, then you shouldn't be buying. These are for the resellers out there. Okay. That's number one. For the brand owners, okay, make sure to avoid product detail page tampering. Okay. There's a few different ways that can happen. Be careful when it comes to bundling. All right. And these are policies that you can read and review and make sure that you're on top of. Some sellers don't, and they think if they get away with it for a couple of months, then they're completely fine. And, a year down the road, they end up dealing with the problem. Make sure your IP is buttoned up. Okay. If you're under attack, enforce it very quickly. Do not sit and wait. These situations never get better. They only get worse. So if you want to do it on your own, that's fine. You can also get in contact with us or any other law firm to try and enforce your IP rights. I would say I gave you about 4 or 5. I'd say those are pretty good places to start. Lots of others, but I don't think we have the time to get to all of them.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's under list of stuff, right? David,
Yeah.
thanks a lot for your time. You dropped some real great advice that the viewers can benefit from. For the viewers, where can they find you?
Sure. So our law firm website is damlawfirm.com. So all of our contact information is there. We also have a YouTube channel. We're on TikTok, Instagram. All of it, I believe, is also on the website. So you can find us there, email, phone number, and social media.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. So I will put all the links down in the description. There will be a link for a discovery call and the website link and the social medias as well. Everything will be on the show notes. Please do check it out. Thanks a lot, David. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.